Welcome to She Has a PhD, a podcast where we celebrate extraordinary women in science. Join us in these conversations where we uncover the stories behind their journey into leadership positions. I'm your host, Rita, and today I'm delighted to be talking with Dr Minmin Yen, who is doing groundbreaking work in the area of infectious diseases and innovation. Born in the United States to emigrated parents, her curiosity about science took her to MIT, where she did her undergraduate studies in biological engineering. Later graduating in microbiology, her PhD was the first step into the entrepreneurial world. Mimi is the CEO and co-founder of PhagePro, a biotech startup that develops innovative therapies to tackle cholera, and she's also the co-founder of Scientists in Solidarity, a non-profit organization that aims to increase diversity in the life sciences. Hello, Mimi. Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me today. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about your background, as you are a first-generation Taiwanese American. Mm-hmm. So would you like to share how your origins have shaped the person you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for this question. I think it has really come into play over the last 10 years as I started reflecting on who I am and what I really wanted to contribute to society. And I think first, as an island, Taiwan itself has so many different cultures influencing its identity, and that really shaped my perspective on the nuances of power dynamics. So who takes up space, whose voice is heard more, and how that actually influences decisions, big and small. Second, since I come from an immigrant family, I've learned how to navigate and integrate disparate worlds and perspectives, which I think is really critical for the leadership position that I'm in. And third, as someone who presents a bit differently than the status quo of leadership in the life sciences, it has almost demonstrated the importance of advocacy and community and why it's so essential to use my voice. And we'll get into a little bit, I'm sure, about how it took a while for me to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. As a young college student, you did your undergrad in biological engineering at MIT. Has this always been your dream to go into MIT?
I think MIT certainly was. Biological engineering, I think, was something that I tried for, but I was not very good at. But I loved the philosophy in engineering of using your skill set to solve the world's biggest problems. And that was one of my biggest takeaways from my time there in the biological engineering department in particular.
Yeah, because MIT is one of the most innovative institutions in the world. So do you think that there was an impact in your career choices by getting involved in technology and innovation so early on?
Yes, absolutely. It's a privilege to be enrolled in an institution like MIT. I think as a freshman, I was able to start a research opportunity in a lab, and that's not something you get at all colleges. They don't usually trust freshmen to be in labs. And I was able to stay with the same lab all 4 years and really grow with the graduate students and the postdocs I was working with, as well as the PI. And additionally, I also got to do science all over the world. And that is also not an opportunity that many undergrads get. So MIT has these programs where you can expand your education and your work experience abroad. So I went to Singapore, I went to Italy, and I learned different approaches to problem solving and science. Even though it's essentially the same framework, people still approach it very differently based off of their cultures and their philosophies. And secondly, I also got involved in Amnesty International and Global Poverty Initiative at MIT. And again, it's combining the how do we use all of our skills and all of the privilege and opportunity that we have to be able to help combat whichever inequities we see and are most passionate about in the world. And for me, that was the health inequity part in infectious diseases.
Yeah, that's what made that call to your heart, wasn't it?
Yes,
yeah, because MIT gives you all of these opportunities in innovation that a lot of universities or faculties don't. So it broadened up your horizons for sure. So after your undergrad, you went on to do a PhD, specifically in microbiology and the study of treatments for cholera. This was quite a bit of a pivot, wasn't it? So what motivated you to go into microbiology?
So I think this goes back to working with the Amnesty chapter at MIT. We did documentary screenings. We learned a lot about the inequalities that really contribute to human rights violations. And one of the documentaries from PBS really showed the health inequities around the world. And for me, I think infectious diseases really called me because it's a disease, or it's a field of diseases that affects people really young. And I think we think about non-communicable diseases like heart disease and cancer, and those generally come into play when a society is able to really uplift its people and have a little bit more income as a country. But to me, one of the largest inequalities was just having access to water and sanitation and hygiene and all of these infrastructures that really can help you just survive. And that's something that we really take for granted in the US. So because I was really drawn to infectious diseases, I wanted to understand the pathogen a little bit more. I wanted to understand what it is that we're fighting, what makes it so good at what it does and makes it so dangerous to humanity. And my approach has always been, let me learn as much as I can. So I did.
Sure, you had a very hands-on approach to, you saw it with your own eyes, and then you try and study it back in the US when you came back.
Yeah.
So your journey just kind of like opened up your horizons, and then you saw all of these inequalities and brought a bit of your experience back into doing your PhD. That's amazing. Yeah. In academia, we often discuss research skills acquired during a PhD. But there are so many other skills that we learn for life, and you've mentioned a few of them now. But which important lessons did you learn during that period of your life? Any translational skills that you brought with you forward?
Oh gosh, PhD is such a hard time for everyone, I feel like. And because it's so hard, I think resilience really comes through. You have to learn how to have a growth mindset, how to pick up yourself after a failed experiment, especially in science where 90% of your experiments are going to fail. How can you take that and incorporate that into a learning? That is what the growth mindset's all about. That's what Harvard Business Review is trying to teach all of its leaders and all of its upcoming business executives. But I think scientists and especially PhD students kind of have that training built in because you have to do it to survive a PhD. So that resilience and curiosity.
I think a lot of students can resonate with that answer, including myself. I think the problem-solving skills that we acquire during a PhD that we can bring with us for life, isn't it? That resilience of like not quitting, just keep going, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
So as I said, you are the co-founder and the CEO of PhagePro. What has inspired you to start a company to discover innovative phage-based products? And can you tell us a little bit about the ethos of the company?
Yeah, so the story started really during my PhD, and I had gotten a fellowship that allowed me to do a clinical practicum, which meant that as I was doing the research at the bench, I also had the opportunity to go see what it looked like in the clinic. So my PhD research was on cholera. I traveled down to Haiti for a month to learn from the people there about how to handle a cholera outbreak. What was the healthcare setting like? Also as an opportunity to train with scientists there on phage research in general. And I think what I saw there really challenged my my mindset and my perhaps naive thinking that everything that we do in the lab is going to translate into something for the patients. That's what we write into grants. That's what we write into articles. But there is this huge gap that exists even in the US and in Western Europe, where not all of that research gets translated into impact for patients. But in low and middle income countries, I think that challenge gets even bigger. So for me, after I returned from Haiti back to the lab, saw that things were working in animal studies, I just really couldn't put it down to have something that works and to know that it takes a lot to actually translate it, and knowing that no one else was going to do it for a disease like cholera, a disease of poverty. I just had to give it a try, at least, even though I wasn't a business person. I didn't really understand what it meant to run a business, but we have to try because no one else will. So I think that really translates to what we do here at PhagePro, that we all believe that health is a human right. And sometimes pharmaceutical companies, even though they talk about helping patients, they might not help all the ones that could be affected. And certainly the ones that aren't going to generate the most commercial success is not where a lot of the investment goes. So I wanted PhagePro to be a different kind of biotech company in that sense, and really focus on the global health inequities that are happening around us.
Yeah, you're looking at the bigger picture, right? You're looking at the outcome for the patient. That's exactly what we're trying to get when we study infectious diseases, right? It's the bigger picture. As you said, you were not a business person, so you had to learn a lot about business. And building a company must have come with a lot of challenges, I'm assuming. So what would you say was your biggest challenge so far?
I think navigating uncertainty in all its forms. So what I've learned as a leader is that for a startup company, you have to be both optimistic and compelling to get people to believe in the cause and believe in the drug and believe in the company. But you also have to be the risk mitigator. So when there's so much uncertainty, what can you control and what can't you control? And the things within your control, what are going to be your risk mitigation strategies for that, whether it be your team and how they're feeling and their motivation, or it's the science, or it's the commercial viability. There's all these risks associated that can really contribute to uncertainty, ambiguity, and in recent years, with the market and pandemic and all of that, even bigger factors that we can't really control. So I would say the biggest challenge so far is for myself, learning how to embrace that ambiguity and doing so and leading the team in a way that we are realistic, where we remain our own cheerleaders, so that we continue to believe and continue to motivate ourselves to fight for something that not many people really want to fight for.
Yeah, and to try and do all of these multiple things at the same time within the company as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
Trying to be the sort of person that can have multiple positions within the company. Absolutely. Touching a little bit on what you said before, were you afraid that the project would be unsuccessful when you started? Did you feel any sort of internal or even external pressure to perform?
I think when I started, I didn't. I was very naive. Now that I'm in it, we started in 2016 and we've navigated through so many ups and downs. I think infectious diseases is not an attractive investment. Cholera, even less so. And I think the biggest pressure is when I think of my partner organizations, my team, the patients, the doctors, everyone who has really believed in us. I think there is an extraordinary pressure to perform and follow through on promises and the vision that I had created and communicated to them of what we can do together. And sometimes when everything is kind of falling apart, it's really hard to believe in your own vision still. But I think it comes to being naive again. I think I have to have this faith that we have all the right pieces to make it work. And I recently heard a world leader say, you have to be naive to start a revolution. And that really resonated with me. You have to believe, otherwise it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're like, oh, this is going to fail here, this is going to fail here. And yes, as a leader, you have to think about that. As a person who is good at their job, you have to think about that, but you also have to balance that out with that positivity and that belief that you are the right one to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to create such an ambitious project, you must have been extremely organized and dedicated, because at the same time, you were doing a master's in public health at Boston University, wasn't it?
Yeah.
How were you able to simultaneously manage multiple projects? This is insane.
I did not do it very well. I think when people tell women that you can do it all, I think that is actually kind of a myth. And those people must have staff to help them with laundry and meal prep and taking care of kids. If you have kids, I think it really does take a whole village to do an ambitious project. It requires leaning on community. What I did get really good at is prioritizing and eventually saying no and setting some boundaries. So I think the last part is something I'm still working on, but in order to do an ambitious project, you just have to say no to some things to let you do those ambitious things. And so that means setting some really hard lines for yourself about what really matters in the moment.
Yeah, and to protect yourself, isn't it?
Yes,
Because
exactly.
we can't do it all. Like you said, I also believe it's a myth. We are only human, right?
Yes, exactly.
During this time, did you have any supportive network around you, or did you kind of feel like a one-woman show trying to tackle everything?
Yeah, I don't have a clear answer to that. I think it's both. I think when you are trying to start something, it does feel like a one person show. You are, as a CEO of a startup, I'm doing the science at the same time as doing the business and thinking and talking to stakeholders and doing all of this. And I think what was really important that I learned is that you need to have a supportive network around you. And my co-founder and PI became one of the most important supports of that network, both at the company and also for my professional life. My friends really stepped up and helped with a lot of the self-talk, especially when things are not going well. But importantly, in the professional sector, something that I didn't really think about was finding mentors, both peer mentors and mentors of people who had advanced to a place in their career that I wanted to be at. And that's something that I started to build out as I continued with the company. And that became really important now. And I really wish I had that earlier on.
Yeah, it's truly inspiring how you transformed an idea into a successful project. So, what is your advice for young scientists that really want to start their own company?
Yeah, I think talk about it as much as possible and test drive it on all sorts of people, even those who you think are not in the field and wouldn't have the right expertise. I think one thing that gets better is storytelling. You learn what works on different audiences, what's compelling, and even friends who are not in the science could be like, "Oh, that was like a scary bit that I don't want to hear about," or like that put me off a little bit. But you get much more creative questions and thoughts that might push you in a direction that you didn't think about before, and that's something that I think I, as an introvert, didn't really do very often. I was like, oh, I gotta like put it together. And also I was perfectionist as well. I gotta present the right thing at the right time. And I wasn't well read on this, and I didn't know this. I didn't talk about it very much. But the more you talk about it, the more ideas you get and the more people on your side you get. So talk about it as often as you can and as early as you can.
Yeah, get the wheel rolling, isn't it?
Exactly.
You have mentioned your advisor, who is also your co-founder of PhagePro, as
Yeah.
being an important mentor to you, and he has helped you develop as a scientist. But unfortunately, in academia, that is not always the case, right? So, what would you give as an advice to someone that has to deal with difficult conversations and straining relationships with their managers, their PIs, their supervisors? What would you tell a young person feeling in a very straining position?
Yeah, and I was very lucky. So my co-founder, Professor Andrew Camilli, he, at his heart, always wanted to do his best for his students and his postdocs. And coming back to that always was really helpful in the transition of our power dynamic. And I think when the person that you're talking to does not have that in mind, it really comes down to setting boundaries for yourself and first getting a little bit grounded. Know who you are, know what you will take and what you won't take, what you're willing to compromise on, and what are some red lines for you. And bring that into a pretty honest and transparent conversation with the person that you're having and saying that we're on the same team here. I just want to align a little bit on this is what I'm receiving from you, and being very careful about wording as well. It's always a perception, right? Everything we hear is always interpreted through whatever we have going on, and understanding that's how it is for the other person as well. So it's always a perception. So trying to get at what the other person is also trying to communicate to you. And if that doesn't work, sometimes, which it doesn't work a lot in some cases. It takes two to do this two-way street thing. It's about depersonalizing that feedback. They say something like really mean and really harsh, and you're like, okay, cool.
You just move on, isn't it?
Yeah. Does that align with what you think of yourself and what other people have given you as feedback? If not, move on, learn how to ground yourself, find support outside of that relationship too. I think that can always help a lot. And there's a book by Amy Gallo. I think it's like How to Get Along with Anyone, even difficult personalities, that I really leaned heavily on during my time in the past couple of years in terms of managing relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on something really important that, especially for students working with supervisor or advisors, is a teamwork rather than a power play. So everyone, you're trying to get your work done, of course, as a student. The PI wants to get that work done as well. So you want to try and find a relationship that has balance, right? How can a young student can look for a mentor or establish a supportive network around them? What would you say it's important to build that supportive network around you?
I think there's different types of mentorship, and I would start with peers first. They tend to be less intimidating. And I think people really undervalue peer mentorship. So who around you has something that you really admire and want to learn for yourself, and start to have that, cultivate that relationship just as friends, just as peers. It could be another grad student in the same lab or a different lab, or it could be another person who just started at the company as well. I think that's a much more casual way of starting a peer mentorship relationship. And then once it gets to people who are a little bit more senior than you and a little bit, you have to be more formal in that relationship. Yeah. I think it comes down to being very specific about what you're looking for. I think some people approach mentorship like, I just want guidance, I just want help. But a senior person doesn't have a lot of time. So they want to know how to help, exactly how to help you, because they want to help. But if you don't give them something, they just don't know what to help you with. So
be precise.
Be precise, and also give something back as well. Realize that as a junior person, you are also capable of mentoring that senior person. So what are they looking for as well from that relationship? It doesn't have to be solely one-sided. And I think those are important things to outline for yourself before you approach someone who you really want to be a senior mentor.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. It has to be a two-way relationship, isn't it? You can always give something back, even though you're junior. Absolutely. Your passion for mentorship and career development has led you to co-found Scientists in Solidarity. This is a brilliant initiative, and I really want you to tell our listeners how it helps support minority communities in the life sciences. And how did you come up with this idea?
Sure. So it wasn't solely mine. I co-founded this with Catherine Suarez, who is a Mexican-American graduate student now at Harvard, and Charmaine Nganje, who I also met at Tufts. All three of us met at Tufts. Charmaine is a Jamaican-American who was a research associate in biotech and has moved out to California to continue that biotech career as well. So all three of us met at Tufts University, a primarily white institution. With our different backgrounds of being East Asian, Latina, and Black, and experienced to varying degrees the same sort of discrimination, right? The different flavors, shall we say, of the same dish. And I think what we found in our friendship is that even though we come from different cultures and different backgrounds, there's a lot of solidarity that can be had among the different groups. And if we really find commonalities together, there's a lot of support we can give to each other as well. And we really should be forming a community around all of us. The Scientists in Solidarity was started because we wanted to extend that feeling of community and safe space to other non-white students and postdocs in the life sciences, because we were all based in Boston, where it definitely is a very primarily white professional space to be in as well. So what we started with was like a monthly chats and all of that. And it's evolved into something a little bit more tailored, where we're really helping graduate students transition into biotech. What are the questions you should be asking to make sure it's a safe space and a safe place for you to work at? But it's been a joy to be a part of.
Yeah.
And I love it when it's about building community, and especially building across some differences that our communities have had historically, and remembering that we're all in this together, really.
Yeah, fantastic. What do you feel is the social impact of scientists in solidarity has within the community? Have you seen fruits of your labor so far?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of professional organizations out there, especially in Boston. And I think what we offer is that sense of intimacy. So a lot of our events are much smaller, and we talk through guidelines of safe space, confidentiality, all of these things. So even though you didn't know someone when you first came into this panel in this breakout room, you still feel safe enough to share some pretty personal things and to find some commonality there. And I think even though their impact is really hard to measure when it's based off of feeling safe, I think what we were able to offer, and I hope to continue to offer, is that you can find a community with us. If you can't find it in your workplace, you can't find it in your school, there are people out there that are hoping to help you advance in your career. Talk about the hard stuff that no one wants to talk about. Talk about what it means to be non-white. What should you be negotiating? What might come at you, and how do you respond to that? That's not something that a lot of professional development activities will talk about. And I think for us, it all comes back to having that safe space to talk about the real stuff.
It sounds like an amazing supportive network. As we discussed about supportive networks before, and it does sound like it's a safe space for people to talk with each other and to help develop each other in their careers. You've mentioned that you're based in Boston, and Boston is a hub for like scientific and social entrepreneurship.
Yes.
What do you think is so special about Boston that it can be replicated in other places?
I think one very special thing about Boston is that it's really dense with a lot of different types of organizations. So we have academia, we have hospitals, we have global health organizations headquartered here, we have lots of investors, we have pharma, we have biotech startups. All of that is within, I think Boston's a very walkable city. It's all of it is in this like little city. So there's a lot of capability to bump into each other and to really build that community. But ultimately, I think what can be replicated in other places is that the Massachusetts government has always been incredibly supportive. So I think what I've learned over the years is that what it really comes down to when it comes to power and how do you make change, it really comes down to policymakers. So Massachusetts policymakers have been incredibly supportive and wanted to grow the life sciences ecosystem. And that draws in a lot of supporting infrastructure as well, like real estate, lab and equipment services, all of that. You need all of that connective tissue in order for companies and for all of the intellectual capital to want to stay somewhere. So I think something that can be replicated, it starts with the policymakers. What can you offer to companies, to entrepreneurs, to people wanting to start small businesses? What are some of these services or incentives or tax incentives that policymakers can offer to make it a more attractive place to go to? And that will start to build that ecosystem and start to build up the bumping into each other effect that really happens here.
Yeah, amazing. Well, unfortunately, the episode is coming to an end, so I have to wrap up. But before I let you go, I have 3 lightning questions. So usually we ask 3 lightning questions to our guests. So are you ready?
Yes,
okay. Lightning question number 1. What was the biggest challenge in your scientific career so far?
To keep going when a lot of people said no.
Wow. Great answer. Resilience. It's all about resilience and persistence. Okay. Lightning question number 2. What advice would you give to an aspiring female scientist?
Know yourself, know your worth, and take up space.
Fantastic. Okay. Last question. Lightning question number 3. Is there a book, an article, or even a podcast that you can recommend? What should we keep our eyes peeled for? If you can recommend 3, we would be delighted.
I think for books, there's two I would recommend there. So for social justice, Ijeoma Oluo's new book just came out. It's called Be a Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership, I think we think a lot about our historical leaders, and that's a leadership style I think that is becoming out of date. So I would recommend Brene Brown's Dare to Lead, which really talks about what vulnerable leadership means, and it
She's
has a
amazing.
workbook too, which is amazing. And then as a podcast, I would actually recommend Anti-Racism Daily. It's a newsletter, but also an Instagram account and also a podcast. It just talks about all these different issues that I didn't really know about, but it all has to do with DEIB. And I think there's a lot about knowing your history that makes us aware. And I think that really motivates us to do something with what we have and to contribute. So I would recommend those three things.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Mimi. It has been a pleasure to have you on She Has a PhD.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of She Has a PhD. Please consider subscribing to our podcast. We hope our inspirational stories of women breaking barriers inspire you to become the next leader in science.